journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead, and you guys, this is a really special episode. I'm so honored, and it has been such a long time in the making to have this week's guest here. Disclaimer, we will be talking about spiritual abuse and child sex abuse. So if this is a triggering topic for you, please be very gentle with yourself and take time as needed to process or even take a break. Oftentimes, folks want to completely avoid this topic, but I encourage you to not look away. And I'm so thankful that you're willing to listen and be witnesses to what has happened and what continues to happen. So these incredible women's stories are full of hope, justice, and connection, and they are turning pain into purpose. So this is ultimately an episode filled with hope, and I cannot wait to introduce you to, we have Sheri Walker, who is a doula and flower farmer. She prefers to mind her own business, but is overcoming her own imposter syndrome to advocate for child sex abuse survivors. We also have Rhonda Grillo. She is a wife, mother, and brain optimization practitioner, as well as the founder of Bridging the Gap on CSA, a support group which creates safe spaces for survivors and advocates of abuse to collaborate, share, and communicate without being criticized or attacked. Ladies, thank you so much for your time and for being willing to share your stories. I am so thankful that our paths crossed and that I get to bear witness to the incredible work that you guys are doing. And I know my audience is going to be super excited to learn more about your mission. So if you guys don't mind, let's start with, tell me a little bit about yourselves and how we ended up here, the three of us having this conversation. So let's start with the first woman I met, which was Sheri. So Sheri, do you mind going first?
Sure. Maybe I'll start with when I met you, Alani. And so this issue of child sexual abuse in our church was fairly fresh, like about maybe 6 or 7 months old for me. It's been ongoing for a long time, but I was in it that long. And then there was a Women's Leadership Network meeting or conference, and I hadn't planned to go to it, but I got a reminder email about 3 days beforehand saying that there was still spots available, and I thought I could go to that. And this little voice says, yeah, you need to go to that. So, okay. So I signed up, and I get there, and the keynote speaker is Alani, and she's speaking about imposter syndrome, but that wasn't on my radar at all. What she was talking about was her experience as hunting drug traffickers and sex traffickers and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember a lot about what she said about imposter syndrome because I was focused on CSA. And one of the other speakers there told her experience with domestic violence. And I'm getting goosebumps just saying this, but I just like, oh, wow. Okay. That's why that little voice said, I need to be at this conference. So then it was a lunch break after you presented, and I would never go and talk to a keynote speaker at any conference, but it's like, you need to go talk to Alani. So I did. It was immediate connection, and you told me that you've put a lot of Christians in jail. Excuse me. And then you gave me a big hug, and it's wow. So then I went home and did my thing. And so that was the beginning of October. January, we went to Kauai for a family vacation, and your name kept coming up, Alani, and you need to reach out to Alani. So I finally did, but I don't know why. I don't know what questions to ask. But when we had that chat that day, you just were, you knew what my questions were without me asking them, and you were just able to, yeah, you just put me at ease, and from there we did a webinar, and then we did a women's retreat. So that's it in a nutshell.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I remember all that magic. So it's always funny hearing it from the other person's perspective because obviously I have a different experience, right? And so to hear after the fact that you experience all this imposter syndrome and self-doubt and the awkwardness of I don't go to keynotes, I don't talk to those people, but you following that intuitive voice is part of what got us here. So how
Right.
about, do you mind sharing? So how did you connect Rhonda? Like how did the three of us get connected? And then we'll transition to Rhonda.
Yeah, so that webinar that you did for us, I believe you were on that call, weren't you, Rhonda?
I
And then,
was.
yeah, and then, so then I forget exactly how it worked. But then when I did the women's retreat and Rhonda came up for that, and yeah.
Yeah. And so then I met Rhonda, and oh my gosh, guys, she's such a powerhouse. So I'm going to shut up and let her talk. But Rhonda, tell us a little bit about your background and your work and how all of this came to be.
Sure, Alani. How much time do you have?
Oh, we will make it work, girl. Yes.
Oh, I'm just kidding you. Yeah, so I had started going back to the two by two child sexual abuse crisis that we're in. I met Alani through that online seminar that you guys did, and then I wanted to go to Montana to Sheri's so that I could meet both of you because here we are in this position where we never dreamed of being. I've learned more about child sexual abuse than I ever dreamed possible. And it wasn't that I wanted to, but it was because when we had the betrayal of our church and this all came to light that it was a real problem for decades, God moved my heart to start educating people about it because it wasn't being taken serious. It was like so many people were so apathetic. So I think the whole experience was because of my own childhood abuse. I was sexually abused at three different ages by three different people, three different experiences, on top of having a father who was a rager, very emotionally and physically abusive. And so it's like God is taking those experiences and using me to advocate not only as a survivor myself, but for others, because those experiences made me very empathetic to people and pain, but also very strong, like fearless.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you both so much for being here. And thank you, Rhonda, for sharing your story. It is, as a law enforcement officer and someone who's worked in this space for a long time, obviously we like to use the term trauma informed, right? So giving people who encounter these horrific events the time and the space and the control to tell their story when they want, when they're ready, or not at all if they don't want to. So it is incredibly powerful that you guys are willing to talk about this because, as we know, it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 to 10 boys, depending on the study, are survivors of child sex abuse. That's 70 million Americans roughly. And so there are a lot of people that aren't speaking because of guilt and shame that need a voice. And so you guys are giving them that voice today. Now, Rhonda, you mentioned a term that I don't think my listeners are familiar with. You said the two by twos. So do you mind talking a little bit about what are the two by twos and what is this big kind of investigation that you're talking about?
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up, born and raised, fourth generation, in a church with no name. But the insiders refer to it as the truth, and those who have left refer to it as the two by twos. And the reason for that is because the doctrine is based on preachers or ministers going out two together and preaching the gospel freely, as Jesus suggested in Matthew 10 when he sent the apostles out for a mission trip. And so what happened was one of our overseers, it was discovered that he had been a pedophile, and he had also sexually abused and raped some of our sister ministers, we call workers. And so this came to light 2 years ago. And all of us that had been abused in our past, we were re-traumatized. And I think the realization that our overseers, our leadership in this church, this no-name church that doesn't have church buildings and nobody's really heard of it because we meet in homes. So it's very mysterious, but very hardy Christians. Like I would call them the salt of the earth, like super sincere, doing the best they can to obey God and the Bible and live like a Christian should live according to the rules that we're given and understood by the ministry and so forth. So it was double devastating, I would say, when we found out that one of our leaders who was highly esteemed and highly regarded. And I would say we regard all of our ministry with a lot of love, a lot of respect. In fact, we put them on pedestals. So we're culpable in this whole situation as well, because there is no accountability system. We trusted them with all of our hearts. And when this news came out, it re-traumatized the victim so bad that it was just an uproar. And there was a lot of questioning and standing up to leadership, which is not something we ever did. It's a culture of just total submission to this ministry, basically, assuming that they were honest and good people. And because we believe that and we observe that, we trusted them. And so when this all came out, it was like spiritual betrayal as well as the other betrayal. And so, yeah, a lot of us got, let me just say, re-traumatization is no fun. You're totally re-traumatized all over again. So, for instance, me personally, I had fought to be pain-free most of my life, but I had all these chronic illnesses and diseases and joint pain and joint issues and all these things that I spent about 1,000 a month trying to just survive my life with all this pain and never healing, never getting better, just surviving my life. And it was a trip, let me tell you. I learned a lot because I started investigating everything out there that I possibly could to try to help myself and to become pain-free. And it was always my goal, and I never gave up. But when this all happened, my pain in my body just doubled down, and I could hardly move. I could hardly take stairs. My joints were frozen. Then I read The Body Keeps a Score book. Somebody had recommended that online, and all of a sudden all my whole life made sense. It was like, so I have all this pain because there's trauma at a cellular level in my body. So that's like a gift from this whole thing, because now I understand myself, my life, and I'm actually healing at a much better rapid pace now because I know how to deal with it better. So does that kind of answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. And my understanding too is so with the two by twos, the FBI has been investigating. I think it's been about a year and a half, 2 years now. It is a very big case, and it's international as well because it is an international spiritual institution. And I thought it was really important to share your guys' stories for a lot of different reasons. First, we already mentioned the number of survivors that there are to begin with and the shame and guilt that's involved with just existing, right? And that's something that when Sheri, you very graciously mentioned that when we met, I already knew what to ask and supported you in feeling safe. And that's because being in the system, I've seen all the things. I have the data, right? And especially in Western society, we have a tendency when we're unhealed to want to project blame on other people rather than taking responsibility for the part that we played. I, as a career investigator, get very frustrated when I hear church people making excuses for the church or not taking action because I have the receipts. And it's between 30 and 40% depending on what jurisdiction I'm in. And I've worked all over the world on these cases, but 30 to 40% of the people that we're arresting are professing Christians or some type of religious person. We've arrested pastors, we've arrested deacons, we've arrested you name it, we've arrested them. And on top of that, a lot of people don't really know that when we do child protection operations, the goal itself is not actually the arrest. The goal is to find children so that we can get them out of those abusive situations and get them the help that they need. And so for lack of a better term, you guys know I'm an investigator, so I'm a little bit inappropriate, but like I'm putting a microscope up your butthole to find any possible chance that you are abusing kids. So we know everything about what's on social media, what you're doing when you think nobody else is looking, because we're looking for survivors. And consistently splashed all over their social media or whatever it, Bible verses, church events, their youth pastors, stuff like that. And it's because we know that they do look for organizations and places where they can take advantage of very trusting people. And so we know abusers have told investigators in the past, churches are great spaces for pedophiles to hide because they systemically are built on trust, on not questioning the authority of the leadership that are in charge. And they're very forgiving people. So even if you get caught, you ask for forgiveness or you play on this card where the Bible says you should forgive. And so they're able to use that structure to their advantage. And so the work that you guys are doing is so incredible because it pushes back on that authority. Like you mentioned, Rhonda, the discomfort in challenging authority, even just asking the question to begin with, is very hard in church spaces because, especially as women, we're taught you don't do that, right? The guys are in charge. And so I'm curious for you because we're talking here, and I'm telling you guys about my heroes, these women in front of me, right? Because they are speaking on behalf of millions of other survivors and doing it courageously and with integrity and honesty. But that doesn't mean it's been an easy journey. And the inner imposter is that little accusing voice that tells you you're not good enough, that you're not worthy. Who are you to say anything? And I'm super curious for you guys. We'll do a toss up on whoever wants to go first, but what have those challenges looked like for you and how did you overcome those obstacles?
I guess I can start. So, if you've ever battled self-doubt or imposter syndrome, how it can just quietly erode your confidence. So, for me, it often looked like second guessing my decisions, even though I really felt prompted by the Holy Spirit. And I was doing something that I knew was not a harebrained idea that I came up with, right? It was the furthest thing from anything that I ever wanted to do. And so I would second guess myself and downplay my accomplishments and helping advocate for survivors and feeling like I didn't truly belong in a leadership position because I was a survivor and I was struggling myself. So no matter how much evidence said otherwise, that naggy little voice really tries to stop you. But I started associating it with Satan because he doesn't like the work any of us are doing, right? He works against us because we're shedding light on evil in the church where it should be less, not epidemic.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. And we're going to get to you, Sheri. I just wanted to comment on what Rhonda had mentioned. So it showed up for you as second guessing your decision, downplaying your accomplishments, believing or at least hearing the voice that you didn't belong in that leadership position. And these are all very normal things to think, right? So anybody who has worked with me or listened to my podcast or read my book knows that when the imposter shows up, it's actually pointing you to your life purpose. So it's funny that you hear these lies in your head and yet here you are, a leader in this healing space, creating massive waves. You have accomplished so much in helping the community heal, right? And you've battled that internal voice yourself. And so you have an interpretation for it based on your belief system. And for you, that's Satan. And I'll just share real quick that And again, this is my personal belief, right? We encourage everybody, you have to do the work yourself to figure out spiritually, like what is happening on your own terms. But people ask me all the time, like, why are you in child exploitation? Of all the things you could do, why that? And it always came down to, I've always hated bullies. Like anybody who's stronger or more powerful that abuses a weaker being, I hate that. And from a spiritual standpoint, when I think about the enemy or Satan wanting to destroy lives, because our spiritual practice teaches us that that's what Satan does, right? And I believe that. The easiest way to me to destroy a life is to get it when it's young and it's vulnerable and it can't defend itself. It can't say no. It doesn't understand what's happening. And we know based on all the psychological reports and studies that the adverse childhood effects scale, right? The ACEs scale and everything shows that when you experience sexual abuse as a child or any kind of spiritual abuse, the chances of you engaging in harmful behaviors, including suicidal behaviors or substance abuse or like those types of things, goes up exponentially. So I exist to stop it from happening before it starts, but also to hold perpetrators accountable so it doesn't continue. And whether people believe that or not, that's my belief system. Is I'm there to stop and hold the line to protect the vulnerable. And the fact that you have those self-doubts as well and you overcame them with this belief system allows you to show up powerfully today and every other day you get on stage. So thank you so much for sharing about those self-doubts. It's always hard to tell people what that inner monologue looks like. But how about you, Sheri?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just the question like, who am I to do this? We haven't lived in Montana super long, and so we don't know a whole lot of people here. And so just reminding myself that God is asking me to say these things, and it doesn't matter that nobody knows me. This is what he wants me to say. So that was helpful. I can talk about my experience at convention if you would like.
Please. Yeah, that'd be great.
So every year we have what we call conventions. They're annual gatherings where we have 2 or 3 meetings a day, and we have visiting workers speak. And I've always loved them all my life. But 2 years ago, um, the day before convention started, there were a few of us that gave a presentation to the workers and some of the elders in the area. And I was asked to talk a little bit about how abuse affects people. And so I'd taken a training when I first started as a doula on when survivors give birth. So I just shared a little bit about the effects of abuse on people. And then a couple of other fellows talked about from the law enforcement side, and then somebody else talked from like the human resources side of it. So that took a lot of courage. I stewed about it for a couple of days. And so the next day when convention started, I was super tired. And I just tried to hide, but everybody kept finding me, and they wanted to talk to me about the situation. And it's that in itself was new to me because people generally don't come to me with their problems. So the second day of convention, I was completely exhausted and I just wanted my space. So and I just wanted to have a nap. So instead of being in our travel trailer, I went and laid on my daughter's bunk in the dorms where it was cool and it was dark and nobody would think to look for me there. So trying to have a nap, and then God talks to me, and he brings to mind some verses of a hymn that talk about courage. And then he very forcefully told me about David and Goliath and had me read all those verses. And in the morning meeting, we had heard from one of the visiting workers about Psalm 37, where it says to fret not. And he told the story of how he had fretted for 25 years about a man who was spreading himself like a green bay tree. But now he was gone. And so God took care of it. He didn't realize that, or he didn't read the room, because we all thought he was talking about Dean Brewer. Turns out he was talking about somebody else. And so everybody was like really upset that he would fret about that for 25 years without doing anything.
Sorry, who's Dean Brewer?
Oh, he was the overseer that in March of 23, the news came out that he was he that letter was this got the ball rolling on making the rest of us aware of all the
Right.
issues.
It blew up the whole space.
It
Yes.
did.
Okay.
Exactly.
Continue, please.
So I'm trying to nap and it's not working. And so in in the meetings, they give an opportunity for the congregation to share their testimony. And I felt very strongly that that he wanted me to share what he shared with me while I was trying to have a nap. But it's no, if I say that, they're obviously going to know that I'm talking about what was said in the morning meeting. And I, no, I'll just give my testimony tomorrow. So we always sing a hymn, and sometimes they ask us to stand up while we're singing, and then it was time for testimonies, and I sat down, and the next thing I knew, I was standing up again. And I had to stand there and wait my turn for probably, oh, I don't know, 20 or 25 minutes. And I'm just shaking in my boots. Anyway, so I started talking about, first of all, the Israelites they were fretting as they watched Goliath and listened to him. And so then David showed up, and I said something to the effect that, well, David didn't stand around fretting. He just picked up the the stones and slung them. And it wasn't like God asked him to pray for Goliath or anything. God asked him to take care of it, and he didn't fret about it. And and I can't hardly believe that the words are just coming out of my mouth. So that was the start of it for me.
Oh man, this is so good, you guys. There's so much here that I want to unpack. And so I'm just going to pick a place to start. But so there is something that I feel from both of you as I'm hearing your stories where this imposter self-doubt voice is loud, but on the flip side, there's either some kind of peace or power. So, like in Sheri's case, it sounds like it was almost like involuntary, right? Like you standing and you're trying to hide and like God just finding you wherever you are. Or with Rhonda, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, this idea that when God tells you something, you can either listen or not, but we know intellectually that God is going to get what God wants. So you can either go with it or you're going to get dragged into your destiny kind of thing, right? So, what does that feel like for you guys? Because I know a lot of people, they'll feel the fear and they might feel like they're powerless to get over that hump of the fear. So, what does that interaction look and feel like for you guys as you're rumbling with God about this task that God's given you?
You want me to go, Sheri?
Sure.
Okay. You know what, Alani, I never really had fear. And I believe it's because of the abuse from my dad. Even like when my mom was pregnant with me, he was abusive. I think I was born with a addiction to adrenaline. And so I had a lot of fun as a kid. The kids would say, climb that tree to the top, and I would, or jump that cliff, and I would. I'm actually lucky to be alive. Fear for me was fun. And so when this all came down, it wasn't really fear that stopped me. It was more like I told God, and I knew it was him because I lost my peace when I kept saying, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not learning about this stuff. I'm not going to educate people. So I lost my peace. Then I'm stubborn, right? And so I was just like, yeah, no, no, thanks. And then I couldn't sleep. And sleep is I have to have sleep, right? When you don't sleep, it's really bad for your brain. And here I am, a brain optimization specialist and barely functioning. So I'm like, okay, 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 I know it's you. And then the excuses that came for me was people think I'm trying to destroy the church. People will not like me. People will criticize me. People will think I'm a bad person or a bad Christian. And it was so shocking to me because I thought ever since my 40s, I really didn't care what people thought, but it was very evident that I did. And basically, you're not going to fit in because in our church, women, we don't stand up to the males, right? We have learned to be submissive, obedient. You just do what you're told. You don't rock the boat. And now I'm becoming a boat rocker. And that part was a little concerning because I didn't know what would happen, but I just trusted God. That one of the beautiful things that have come out of this whole experience is just truly being led by the Holy Spirit and not being fearful and actually experiencing protection from God. And when I use those excuses to him, you know what he told me? He was like, "Welcome to the persecution club. I got your back." And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I literally heard that audible voice. And it's been interesting because being a boat rocker and standing up to leadership and being very public about it, bridging the gap, our thing is truth, transparency, and hopefully transformation. And it's got to start from the top down. And so I'm taking the overseers head on and having these conversations and writing them letters and inviting them to my Zoom meetings. And nobody kicked us out of the meetings. We chose to leave after a year and a half of doing that. And that's unheard of. If you ever rock the boat, you had a wrong spirit and you were removed from the meetings. And that was it. So it was quite interesting that we lasted that long before we just decided there wasn't change happening. Instead, it was more like they were just dogs with a bone and they weren't going to let go of the way they do things, which includes no accountability, no changes, putting the perpetrators back in the meetings worldwide starting in January. And just I cannot be complicit to that. I absolutely cannot.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. So there's a couple things that you mentioned, which was an indicator for you that you were not doing what you were supposed to do was when you lost your peace. And that is such a great indicator. So again, in the spiritual biblical context, the fruits of the spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and then the fruits of the flesh are conflict, strife, like all the other things. And so that is a great tool that I share with people that I'm like, do you have peace or not? Because if you don't, that's an indicator that you need to stop and maybe go back and talk to God about how to get peace. Or in your case, and I've experienced this too, I know exactly what I need to do. I just don't want to do it. But then choosing, hey, if I want my peace, then I have to be obedient to what the Holy Spirit or my intuition is telling me that I need to do. So that is super, super powerful. And I think too, it's important to note that oftentimes the type of work that you're doing, so you encountered resistance at the work that you were doing. You didn't have fear because you were built to manage that resistance and still go forward and do it. So that's another point I want to mention for folks is oftentimes people think you have to look a certain way in order to advocate for survivors. But as you guys have heard me say, it's important for you to bring your gift to the table, right? And I like the casserole example because I'm like, you guys don't know how powerful casseroles are. Like, if you're an amazing casserole maker or baker, right, just dropping one at someone's door could mean the world to them. And maybe that's your gift. You don't have to fit yourself into this box, right? We each play a different part, and as a community, we create solutions at a larger scale than we could on our own. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So Sheri, how about for you?
So that experience that I had at convention really bolstered my courage. And then I felt compelled to send a few emails and to organize the webinar with you and try to get people to show up for that. And some of the emails that I found myself writing, it's like I bargained with God a little bit too. I don't really want to say those kinds of things. I guess there was fear for me because I am not a public speaker. I am not one to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, you know. That's what I told myself, but this this involves my brothers and sisters in Christ, so it is my business. And so just being reminded of that. And then like in your book you talked about a lot of times you would just feel really anxious or whatever for 2 or 3 days before a certain mission. And so I would get those kinds of sensations in my body. Like I'd get butterflies and I'd get shaky and so then I'd know, okay, this is something that I really need to do. And every time I did it, I pressed send or whatever, I just got such a sense of peace that came over me. So after a while, it was, it became not so intimidating to say the hard stuff and to speak up on others' behalf. Yeah.
Yeah.
My, my, so my tagline for my doula business is calm, confident courage to birth your way. And a year and a half ago, that became my personal mantra, like calm, confident courage. And
Mm.
just knowing that God was asking me to do these things and to say the hard stuff was that's what got me through it.
Oh, I love that so much. And you also bring up so many amazing points. One of them that I want to highlight is this idea of your mantra with the calm, confident courage. Western society especially likes to portray courage as being this loud, powerful thing. But in the spiritual space, so the God that we follow, the teaching is that my grace is sufficient for thee, for my power is perfected in weakness. So actually, it's when we feel weakest that God shows up most powerfully. Because, and this is my interpretation, so I can't take credit for what happened, right? So when people ask me, like, Alani, how have you had all this success in the anti-exploitation space? I'm like, it wasn't actually me because I was scared poopless 3 days ago and I had to ask God for help. And some people look at me crazy. I'm like, hey, I'm just, you asked and I'm telling you the truth. And that's the truth. Like, I was scared. God help me. The end of story. But also, this theme of like counterintuitive elements being the most powerful ones are such a big theme in our faith, right? So like you all you need is faith the size of a mustard seed. So like a mustard seed is so tiny. It's the tiniest seed on earth, but it is the beginnings of one of the biggest trees on earth, right? And I always think of this is a silly example, but just to illustrate the point, if you guys remember Men in Black, the old Will Smith movie, they're looking for this universe throughout the entire movie. And they come to this point where the universe they seek isn't a marble around a cat's neck. And this alien tells them, you humans think that in order for something to be powerful, it has to be big, but it can be really small too. And so, whether it's speaking your truth out loud or like standing up against injustice or just giving someone space to listen to their story and validate them. I always love to say never ever disrespect your first day effort or your smallest effort because that tiny effort, I promise you, is magnified and gigantic if you just offer it up in love to a fellow human being. So I love that your mantra is it is powerful, it is quiet, but it's steadfast, right? It's like a wall. Like you're not going to get through Sheri Walker. You know what I mean? And I love that. So I'm curious also to hear from you guys about, so we're talking about spiritual abuse at its core. And something I hear a lot from people is, why should I trust God? God allows all these things to happen, right? Or maybe they happen to me. And we know that there's a fracture in the relationship between that individual and however it is that they interact with God. What would you guys recommend for people who maybe are hearing the story, your stories, and thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's me. I've experienced that and I'm so mad at God right now," or "I don't want to go back to the church." What would you want to share with them today to give them peace and hope?
I think God understands anger. He's been angry himself. And as a parent, I have had my children be very angry with me at times and didn't make me love them any less. And so anger is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do with your anger. And if we can take our anger to God, and long before this, I've told God that I was mad at him, and he just gave me a big hug. He understands our anger.
Mm, that's so good. Thank you for sharing.
So for me, whew, this is a hot button. Because God told me here in Texas, they had what they called a listening tour, where everybody that wanted to come in the church could come to these meetings. And the ministers were there, some of them about five or six, and then people. And you could ask questions or share your survivor story. And God kept telling me, you need to tell your story. They need to know what it's like for a survivor, blah, blah, blah. And so finally, I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And so I wrote it out because I'd never told my story before. A victim of abuse, no matter what kind of abuse it is, you spend your whole life trying to overcome the story, not dwell on the story. But I told my story, and apparently it took about 40 minutes. And the reason I know that is because I was accused of hogging the meeting later on. It blew up online, and people, my name got out there that I had basically hijacked the meeting, and along with Sheri, another victim. So anyway, literally I was sobbing and crying. You know how when you're just so emotional, and I'm shaking and I'm upset and I'm telling my story, and later I was accused of being angry. I was too angry. I showed a wrong spirit. And I thought, yeah, think. And to me, it was righteous anger.
Mhm.
Anger was created by God, and God throughout the Bible shows his anger. And there was consequences when he was angry. Jesus, he overturned tables, and that was my response to this minister that told me I was so angry. I'm like, at least I didn't overturn the tables. But there, it's righteous anger, and it's a beautiful thing that God uses so that we take action, right? It's the motions that get us to move and cause things to change. And so anger can be our friend. There's a time in my life where I was very angry with God too. I said to him in a moment where I was totally overwhelmed, and there was so many bad things happening in our lives. This is 15 years ago or so. And I just told him, you said you wouldn't give us more than we can bear. And I'm over with I'm bearing too much. I can't do this anymore. And I was angry. And I actually told one of my aunts who doesn't go to our church, because I trusted her not to judge me, and I could share that this dirty little secret that I was angry with God. And she was great. She's, if anybody can handle your anger, God can. And he sees your heart and he knows your purpose. And so just let him, tell him why you're angry with him. So what I would say to anybody that's angry with God, yeah, you know what? It's hard to understand how God could allow innocent, vulnerable children to get a life sentence to trauma by horrible people. But God gave us free will. He gave us choice. And that's what it's all about here. We get to exercise our will. And it's either good intentions or bad intentions, good or evil, whatever it is. And we experience that. And it's also an opportunity to take the ashes and turn them into beauty and learn how to forgive. But there's a lot of confusion. I've written many articles about forgiveness on my website because there's such a misunderstanding about forgiveness. And it's always directed to the victims, but the perpetrators and the overseers don't want to be held accountable. And that is not what the Bible teaches. There is accountability. So I know I'm going off on another topic, but anyway, anger's good. It causes change.
No,
Right.
I think that's so great. And it was a perfect tangent because for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, God is a God of anger. And it's funny because when I've had my own thoughts on this, like it's God, right? God is in control of everything. God knows the
Mhm.
plan. Like, and yet God still got angry knowing what was coming. Right.
Yeah.
So, similarly to how God rested on the seventh day, that wasn't because God needed rest. It was because God was modeling for us that we should rest too. And
Mhm.
so I think he models that anger when he sees injustice because we should be angry at injustice. And even the examples of Jesus flipping tables, it happened in the church because people were defiling God's house. And
Mhm.
so I can't think of a better reason to flip tables over in a church when we're talking about the well-being of children. Like they're the first people I will be flipping tables over. And I think also what you're both highlighting is the healing journey is a long process
Mhm.
and we're all in different stages. And wherever you are, it's okay. It's okay to sit in the pit, as I call it, and shake your fist at God. And I know Rhonda and Sheri are much more polished than I am, but I like to say, like, God can handle all of your fucks. Like, He's not scared about the words or the language that you use. If you choose not to use that, that's totally fine. But I'm an investigator. We use that word a lot. But the point is that like I can go to God exactly as I am. And in fact, when you have someone that you love who's hurting, don't you want them to show up as broken as they need to be so that you can love on them and show them that, hey, as you are, I fully accept you and I support you and we're going to get through this together. And my experience and what I've heard, I've never heard differently, right? But when you have the courage to sit in that anger and fully express it, God really does show up and he starts to heal you. And you start to learn that when you express that anger, you're not only standing up for yourself, but you're standing up for other people who are experiencing the same thing, right? And so you become a protector in sharing that anger. And in the coaching practice I have a tool I use. It measures emotions. And so we have at the bottom like victim, then anger, then forgiveness, then compassion, and then there's some other ones above it. And most people, especially women, operate in like a compassion forgiveness space because that's what we're conditioned to do. And a lot of times, if they primarily lead with forgiveness emotions, I have to bring them down to anger to give them space to vent all of the like suppressed parts of themselves so they can leapfrog up to like joy and peace because they've harbored all of that stuff inside. And I love that you guys are sharing these stories about how to process the anger because the anger should be one of your first go-to tools when you want to create that change. And that's another thing that the church doesn't teach. And I have
Right.
to say that I almost feel bad for any pastors or workers or church leaders in positions that perpetrate these abuses or cover up for them. Because I really do believe there's a special place in hell for someone who's given that level of leadership to spiritually disciple folks and then to take advantage of it on that level. So, with that being said, the healing process is a journey. So, if you're mad at God, you can leave the church. You can shake your fist at God. You can yell at people, do whatever you need to do. I know for me, I'll be honest, like I am still very tight with God. I'm still working on getting back to the physical church itself because it can be very difficult for me to walk into a church and I'm looking around and I'm like, 35% of you are doing stuff I know that you're doing. And you're sitting here acting all pious, and I can't do that. Like, I can't sit in those environments. So, with that being said, for the listener who maybe, I don't know if there's a key message you want them to walk away with, whether it's how to set and enforce boundaries for themselves or how they can start that process to heal themselves. But what are some key takeaways that you want to share with the listener?
Go ahead, Sheri.
I think going back to the anger, when this all first came to light, I was very angry, but I also realized that there would be something wrong with me if I wasn't angry. And then just to I remember listening to a podcast that you did with a psychologist and wanting, there is something about us that just wants justice, like immediate justice. But in that conversation, the psychiatrist mentioned that Pharaoh, why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Well, it wasn't so much that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, but he gave Pharaoh 10 chances. He sent plagues and he still didn't get it. So that really helped me to let go of wanting to have justice here and now and to understand that God is a God of justice and justice will come. It won't be in my time, but it will come. And then I guess just to acknowledge where you're at and don't feel ashamed or feel guilty for the way you feel, because this is big stuff. Like, it's really big. And I've said many times that this is such a profound grief that we've never experienced before. We have to figure out how to work through that grief process. And it looks very different than it does for losing somebody to death. So,
Oh man, that is so good. And it's funny you brought up Pharaoh and Moses. Yeah, 10 times Moses went to him. And I know I'm a Puerto Rican, so I'm very impatient. But when I say something or do something the first time and it doesn't happen, it's easy for me to be like, it didn't work. But Moses, for those who aren't familiar with the story, was obedient every time God told him to go back. And by the way, for those who don't know the story, Moses kept telling Moses or God and bargaining with God. He was like, I can't speak, right? Like, why would you pick me to be your mouthpiece? I stutter, I'm slow of speech, and yet my grace is sufficient for thee, for my power is perfected in weakness. So I know I sometimes struggle with when I failed a couple times or I share the message and I feel like it doesn't land the way I want it to. It's easy to want to give up. But you look at these stories in the Bible and it's over and over and over again. And justice always, always, always comes at the end of the day. Oh, I love that. I got like goosebumps hearing you talk about that. But how about you, Rhonda?
Yeah, that was profound, Sheri. What comes to me is that sometimes the most valuable experiences are the hardest ones, and we need to remember that healing is messy, and God asks us to do hard things so that we can help others. So again, I never imagined that I would be starting the Bridging the Gap on CSA Zoom meetings and then a website. It was one of the most messiest, most emotionally raw projects I've ever taken on. It wasn't just messy in the practical sense, but figuring out how to build a team and build trust and coordinate contributors, or organizing decades of horror stories and giving a voice to survivors. It was all just spiritually and psychologically messy and hard. I was digging into trauma, facing pushback from our leadership, and pouring my heart into articles that were sometimes met with silence and denial or outright hostility. So it's whoa. And then there were sleepless nights, and there was gut-wrenching moments, and there was seasons when I wanted to quit, because holding truth and trauma in the same hand is never clean, and it was affecting my health too. But and even now, I still have some unresolved feelings, right? Grief still bubbles up. Grief's a long process. We kind of cycle through it. Anger still flickers sometimes, but I've learned that resolution doesn't always mean closure. We can still, resolution means choosing to keep going despite the lack of it. That's the bottom line. So I process complicated situations by moving forward. I'm convicted. I don't expect perfection. I write, I pray, I cry. I would say I'm closer to God than I've ever been. I speak truth, and you would think that that would be a good thing, but people don't like hearing the truth. It's very fascinating, and then I surround myself with others who understand the cost of standing in the gap. And at the end of the day, I look at messy and it doesn't seem wrong. It just seems like it's what you have to do sometimes, and it's doing what no one else is willing to do. So I guess the bottom line for others is that in the middle of this mess, Jesus meets me, and he's been showing me how to turn ashes into beauty and pain into purpose and battle scars into a testimony that sets others free. And as we do life and it's messy, look for the beauty you can find in the ashes of your hardest experiences in life.
That is so good. Oh my gosh, on so many levels. And hey guys, just hearing these two incredible women share these lessons learned and these testimonies, I just want to remind you, if this resonates with you, there are roughly 70 million of you just in the United States, right? And this is something as a survivor that it can be hard to understand because you're in it, right? But the reason I think partly that they deny and avoid and accuse and all the things is because they are so terrified of you guys because of your power, and they know that they're about this big. And you two are these incredible giants of leaders in this space. And I'm so thankful that you listened to that tiny voice, and that even though you avoided, it still came and found you, and you were still willing to use these tools, right? So today, the tools that you guys shared were trust, surrender, prayer, love, like all these spiritual tools that maybe the average person doesn't think is powerful, but these tools are the most effective tools we have, right? And so thank you so much for sharing your stories. You guys, like truly, you are two of my personal heroes, and I do not throw that term around lightly, but you're way more powerful than you realize. And I know you guys are going to be all like, no, 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 for real. You guys are absolutely incredible. And so I know people are going to want to find you guys. So where should we direct them to if they want to connect with you and your missions?
For me, it's Bridging the Gap on CSA.com, and there's a contact email in there.
We will put that in the show notes. We've got that. Thank you so much. And how about for you, Sheri?
Yeah, I don't have a website, but I do have an email address. It's hopeinhealingthejourney@gmail.com.
Oh, that's such a good handle. We will make sure to link both of those in the show notes. Guys, my final message for the listener is we are way past the stories. This is about hope and about winning and victory. And you have it already. Despite what you might think that inner imposter, self-doubty voice is telling you, you've already won because God already said you won. And so these women are walking that truth, even though they might feel shaky or angry or unhealed or messy, whatever it might be. And I'm so thankful that they have had the courage today to model that for us. Thank you both so much. I love you. I'm so thankful. And to the rest of my listeners, if you're looking for more resources, check out my website, mightysparrowcoaching.com. And until next time, Humble Warriors, please remember the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your inner imposter to work for you. I love you guys, and I'll see you soon. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at Alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI at mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.